Andrew, as the resident, person who cares about this deal, and it is a part of your life more than either of us. When you saw that this happened, what was your immediate reaction?
Ooh, so there's levels to this. I just want to everybody that covers the NBA, thinks about the NBA, watches the NBA, and more importantly, is a fan of an NBA team. You might only get one big trade that you have the chance to react to in your lifetime, or at least over the course of like 5 to 10 years. And you get to process things in the moment of like, oh my gosh, we just made this big trade. My team never makes the big trade.
Right.
Last 9 months, Knicks have made the NBA's big trade 3 different times. So I now had the chance to get practice at this. In fact, this is now the second big trade they've made before playing another game after the last game that the last big trade that they made. And I think the first reaction I had, honestly, it had nothing to do with Julius Randle, had nothing to do with Karl-Anthony Towns. The Villanova identity that was created when they traded for Mikal Bridges and how we were going to go all in on culture and the power of friendship is now gone because Donte DiVincenzo was in the trade. And then you start to process, Julius Randle was extension eligible and is now going to a team. Obviously, the Knicks weren't going to extend him. We had heard some things that they were just far apart in number and that the Knicks, look, whether or not they were intending on trading him before media day is a different conversation, but that they didn't want this to necessarily linger into the season. And, he ends up going out in the deal, but after the initial shock wore down, you start to think about their needs. And what's the common thing you both have brought up? Well, okay, really more what Bryce has brought up, because Sam, you actually dispelled my concerns about their center depth.
So, yeah, I think I was hoping that Mitch would be ready earlier.
Right.
I think that knowing now that Mitch was not as ready as what we had hoped certainly changed my idea of how urgent the center position was for the Knicks.
So with the Knicks having on Monday announcing that Mitchell Robinson's earliest return date or target return date was going to be December, not only we're going to potentially lean into small ball, we're going to have to lean into small ball. It wasn't a maybe, it was a definitely. And now you went and got arguably the best stretch 5 ever. I think Wemby's going to make a case for that race being over pretty soon. But the fact that they went and got a center that you don't have to think about death lineups and small ball and whatnot, and you can just think about the offensive ceiling. I've talked myself into the offensive upside of this. I understand losing DiVincenzo hurts, especially after a record-breaking season he had last year. I also, for a while this summer, was like, so where are they finding DiVincenzo's minutes? Like, they went out and got Anunoby. They have Mikal Bridges. Tibbs loves Josh Hart. He's Jalen Brunson's best friend. And Julius Randle's coming back. Unless you go small, where's DiVincenzo getting more than 20 to 25 minutes? And not to say he was a luxury, but you understand why he was able to go out in this deal and they're not feeling a crunch there. So I'll be honest, I'm still processing it a little bit. I still have some concerns, especially on the defensive end, but they've now created a very high ceiling offensively that I'm very intrigued by.
Bryce, what was your immediate takeaway?
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked. That was my first thing. I think the Villanova Knicks, actually, whether it's that would definitely, I was like, really? Donte? After Jalen took the discount and they traded for Mikal, like they're going to trade Donte, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit more. I think the first thing I tried to think of was, does this move the needle for me with the Knicks? That was the first question I asked myself. I find myself asking or seeing this from the Knicks perspective more than the Wolves. And then I got into the Wolves a little bit more. And my initial reaction, I think my reaction right now is still no. I'm still trying to process that, but I don't know that I feel any better about the Knicks right now than I did Friday at whatever time before this happened. Maybe I'm not seeing something. I'm not saying this is an awful deal, But if I'm going to trade the guys the Knicks traded, I think I would want to feel different about the return.
So, yeah, just my immediate reaction, I'll say, was for Karl-Anthony Towns, because the first tweet that I saw was Karl Towns tweeting like ... like ellipses, right? And then literally in the tweet below it, when I refreshed my feed, it was Shams' Karl-Anthony Towns has been traded, right? So my immediate reaction was, okay, so Karl probably didn't know this was going on at that case. So my immediate take was, oh, wow, like Karl-Anthony Towns has been traded from the only place that he's ever been in his career in Minnesota, a guy that has done an immense amount of community work in Minnesota, a guy that has done a great amount of, rebuilding within that organization, right? This team really struggled to get it going. They had a false start for 1 year with Jimmy Butler where it seemed like things were going great. And then, that collapses under the weight of a practice where Jimmy Butler guarded Karl-Anthony Towns with the third string and kind of, beat their ass according to reports that occurred at the time. One of which was Jimmy Butler doing an interview with Rachel Nichols immediately after the practice. And then he has to rebuild again. And then he gets Anthony Edwards. And now this team is rising and they're becoming a real powerhouse within the Western Conference. And we look at it, and this completely alters the trajectory and landscape of the NBA at this point, because we think the Knicks are fairly real contenders, certainly in the Eastern Conference, as we've talked about throughout the last month on this show. Obviously, we think Minnesota is a real contender in the Western Conference. For this deal to happen on the eve of training camp, I know that we got it last year with the Damian Lillard, Drew Holiday deal, DeAndre Ayton going to Portland, etc. This stuff is rare still, right? It's very weird to see such a shakeup trade on the eve of training camp right before things get going, especially involving two teams that are genuinely contending. It's crazy that this happened, and Karl Towns gets to go, obviously a guy that grew up in New Jersey, gets to go, to a team that, if I remember correctly, Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong here, I believe he did grow up rooting for the Knicks.
Grew up
right?
a Knicks fan. He's one of there's
Right.
a nice folder of younger NBA players when they were kids with Knicks paraphernalia on that they're now on the Knicks. Brunson being one of them. Yeah, Cat's one.
It's amazing. So if he was going to go anywhere and probably be on some level disappointed that he's being moved from the only city that he knows, going to New York is probably the best place for that. So the way that I want to, structure this conversation, let's say, I want to talk about the Knicks first. I want to talk about Minnesota after, and then I want to talk about like all the ancillary stuff and the title picture and how this affects that. So let's start with the Knicks. And to do that, I think we have to kind of discuss what Karl-Anthony Towns is at this point. I will ask you guys this. When I immediately saw this deal, I thought it was an overpay by the Knicks. Part of that is contract based, because I did not really think Karl Towns had an immense amount of value league wide on the massive extension that he signed, 4 years, like 240-ish, 230 million or so. Especially given that even though he was an all-star last year, there were moments in the playoffs where Minnesota didn't really close with him. They closed with Naz Reid over him. There has, even though they were successful last year, been a bit of a push-pull between the Rudy Gobert and the Karl Towns portion of the front court. They figured out a way to make it work after a pretty messy first season. I still never really thought that it was ideal, and I've always thought that offensively, Karl-Anthony Towns' best position is the 5. Defensively, though, can you actually have Karl Towns on your roster, playing him at the 5, and expect to have a positive defensive infrastructure? Now, before I pulled a ton of numbers on that last night. I will just ask you guys, maybe we'll start with Andrew as the resident Knicks person here. How do you feel about how big of an upgrade Karl-Anthony Towns is from Julius Randle?
So that I think is the appropriate way to ask this, because there's like internal debate within me and the guys at Knicks Film School. For years, when the Karl-Anthony Towns scuttlebutt would come up, that obviously there's the CAA connection, the Kentucky connection. Like there was very clear interest in the Knicks front office in Towns. And I'd be like, I'm not 1000% sure that it's an upgrade over Julius Randle if he's playing the 4, and you're just going like a 4 for a 4. Like, I like Julius's playmaking. I like surrounding Julius with a bunch of shooters and using him as a hub. It's why anytime I talk to you guys about like the loss of Hartenstein, I was like, well, I think you're going to get that from Julius Randle, who's also just a better offensive player. And now I have to like talk myself into Karl-Anthony Towns being better than Julius. As far as 1-to-1, I think if I had to pick one, I would pick Towns, but I'm not going to sit here and be like, it's definitive. I know what the numbers say. I know what he is efficiently as a shooter. I just also know what Julius's gravity commands as a downhill threat. And, it says something about you when like defenses load up against you. And that's what Julius provides. And the Knicks, built a team this wasn't a good stats, bad team guy. This was a guy that made the playoffs a ton. And in one playoff series against the Hawks, the entire team decided we're going to load up against him. And he had a bad series. And then in the other 2 playoff series, he went into the series hurt, got hurt again, and then went into the next series playing hurt. So I'm able to have some context with his playoff struggles. And then there's Karl-Anthony Towns, who I know there's been a lot of Knicks propaganda from the Twitter world that look how he shut Jokic down last year, which obviously is nonsense. And I have my hesitations about Cat, specifically defensively, but then showing up in playoff games as well. So that's where I'm at with the 1-to-1, is that I would lean Cat, but I'm not definitive or adamant about it.
Yeah. So I pulled some clips last night. If you're watching on YouTube, which by the way, watch on YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube channel, you'll be able to find, Nikola Jokic and Karl-Anthony Towns being guarded by one another and figuring out, how good Nikola Jokic actually was against Cat and how good Cat was against Jokic. To me, I always thought that Karl-Anthony Towns did a solid job of sending Jokic toward the help and kind of filtering him there and basically executed the scheme. But I didn't think that Karl-Anthony Towns was the biggest part of why Jokic, was slightly less efficient in that series, right? It felt like to me, it was more Rudy Gobert being the help defender coming over was a little bit more valuable, right? That's the first part of this. The second part of this equation for me is the health aspect for Karl-Anthony Towns. Over the last 4 years, Julius Randle has been worth 32.4 wins, according to the Dunks and Threes EPM model, which for me is the best all-in-one kind of metric happening. Karl-Anthony Towns has been worth 32 wins over the course of that time. Big portion of that is that Karl Towns over his last 5 years has only played 250 out of a possible 382 games. Karl-Anthony Towns tore his meniscus last season. He has little things that continue to pop up where he misses time. He played 62 of 82 games last year. He played 29 of 82 games the year before. He played 74 of 82 in 2021-22. And then in, what would that be? 2020-2021, he was 50 of 72. And then in the COVID year, he played 35 of 64 games, right? this is like not a great injury track record for a team that has a injury prone starting center in Mitch Robinson. And also for a team that has moved a significant amount of its depth now in order to acquire Karl-Anthony Towns. So that's I think where I'm the most worried about this is from a depth perspective. We kind of love the idea of Tibbs having a number of different bodies and different ways that he could, throw things, right? Throw things at, different teams. This deal to me kind of locks them in a little bit more to playing a specific style, unless you want to try and play Karl and Mitch together, which, as you said, Andrew, I don't think you're particularly enthused about.
Look, there's matchups we could go to it.
Yeah,
but like if you want to go double bigs, fine. You trade for Karl-Anthony Towns to put him back at the 5 to now have a shooter on the floor,
right?
And again, it's the offensive upside as far as I'm concerned.
So, Bryce, what do you think of the lack of flexibility lineup wise that this kind of creates when to me, part of what the Knicks were building was this incredibly fun, switchable, lineup where you could adjust to what different teams are playing. That's the whole benefit to me of having OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges, is being able to slide them up to the 2 and the 3, slide them down to the 3 and the 4, maybe even OG guards 5s occasionally. Like there are just a lot of different kind of things here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where I win as well. Was like, I hate to go back to Donte again, and we've talked about the depth, and we can't just get rid of that depth after a single 2-for-1 trade. But I find myself like, your one Deuce isn't maybe as good as we thought he is. Like, I hope Deuce is, but what if Deuce isn't?
Yeah,
or Shamit is not able to come in and even
somewhat. And like Landry can't play in the playoffs. Like we know that at this point.
And I realize like there's people will throw out Cam Prain, Tyler Kolek, who you love, we love, Sam on this pod, Landry, but it's like Donte was one of the top 5 gravity perimeter guards in the NBA last year. I think is that fair?
Yeah.
Gravity wise. And and then does all the other things as well. So you lose that. And so you just lose some of the depth. I know we don't want to get into the minutia yet, but then you also trade away one of the existing picks you had left. And so now you're down to whatever you have left that you didn't send the Nets, and then the Wizards pick. So it's just like, I think you mentioned this, you're kind of starting to get locked into a core, which is okay if it all works. And I think where I'm at after listening to you, Andrew, is I think Cat has to come in and play the 5. Mitch is your backup 5, and you just got to live with he stretches people out, which like will be interesting. Like now you can pull Porzingis away from the rim when you play the Celtics, Embiid away from the rim when you play the Sixers. And then you got to hope OG, Mikal, and Josh are just so good defensively that it doesn't matter. Now, what's scary is teams that can figure out how to just attack Jalen and Cat in ball screens or off ball actions or whatever, and just go at those two and isolate those two guys in action at, over and over and over.
I think that's what's, I mean, we talked about this a little bit last night, the obviously off the air, but like, I do understand the defensive concerns, the ability to put Anunoby and Bridges and Josh Hart or Deuce McBride,
or Deuce, Deuce,
right,
Deuce,
like, whoever you want to put as your 5th starter here. And like, I'll even go this far. I have a lot of hesitations here offensively, but if you wanted to go to Precious Achiuwa there, then he can guard your 5s, and that just slides everybody down 1 as well. Then it's the same principle as when he was playing the 4 last year, except now he doesn't have someone in the dunker spot. Now Cat is spacing the floor. But that being said, like, you're gonna have you were gonna have the same problem, I believe, with Randle as well, which is why the thought with the quote unquote death lineup that a lot of Knicks fans had started to speculate about, with OG Anunoby and Randle as your 4-5, was that OG guards the 5s on one end of the floor, Randle can guard the 4s, and you just kind of switch if you want to. And, if you wanted to switch 2 through 5 with Brunson hiding on whoever, you could probably get away with that. And then offensively, it's really good. And I think you now just have that same principle where, Cat's guarding a hybrid of 4s and 5s. I'm not saying the Knicks are going to have a great defense. The conversation you guys had, a week or two ago about the best defenses in the NBA. I don't know if the Knicks will have a top 10 defense this upcoming season.
I feel quite confident they won't.
They won't, especially with how, but I just wonder if we're now going the other way. Like, is this now going to be a top 3 or 4 offense with, the potential for it to be more efficient? That team that finished top 4 in offensive rating 2 years ago was like a heavy offensive rebound team, that it wasn't about the first shot. It was, we're getting 3 or 4 attempts at the rim. This now becomes a team that prioritizes making the first shot. And this is weird that the Knicks have just decided the Celtics won, so let's try to be them, the Boston Celtics. So that would be my counter to all that.
Well, here, real quick, both of you, Sam.
Yeah.
Is there any worry about the creation that you lose? Because I feel like with Julius, that was something we anticipated him bringing. Maybe the number one thing for me that I thought Julius brings back to this team is, even if it's just in the regular season, it takes some load off of Jalen creating everything. By the way, Julius versus the Hawks series was that was my coming out party as a video breakdown.
Yeah.
That was the first one I ever hit. But Cat can pass. You can run the offense through him a little bit, but not in the same way, I don't feel like. So are there concerns there?
Yeah, in the front court, I don't really think that there are. I think that Karl-Anthony Towns and Julius Randle are similar-ish level players in terms of being able to go and create a shot if you need one late in a shot clock, right? They do it in different ways. Julius is going to try and drive and put his shoulder into you and get to that little, fade away that he takes sometimes, or he's going to try and get all the way to the rim, or he's going to try and throw it off the rim and offensive rebound, right? They do it in different ways. Cat's probably going to try and take you onto the block, or he's going to try and face you up from behind the 3-point line and shoot it, or shoot over the top of you. There are just different ways that they go about playing, right? But I don't think they lose that. I think that they, losing Donte, to answer my earlier question that I asked you guys, right? Is there a massive difference between Cat and Julius Randle? I think there is a difference. I think Karl-Anthony Towns is better than Julius Randle, for sure. I do not think that the difference between Karl-Anthony Towns and Julius Randle is as large as Donte DiVincenzo on what Bryce and I just said was one of the 10 best contracts in the NBA, 3 weeks ago?
Yep.
And on top of that, you give up a first-round pick, and you have to create all these weird machinations in terms of the salary cap to make it work under the collective bargaining agreement. The reason for that is that Donte became an awesome player and playmaker and creator off of Jalen Brunson late in the season last year. Andrew, what did Donte DiVincenzo average over his last 35 games of the regular season this year?
In points or threes made?
Points.
Are you asking? I actually don't know, but it's probably close to 16 or 17 a game.
He averaged 21 points per game.
Wow.
Over his last 35 games of the season this year.
Word? Really?
Donte was really good. Yeah. He shot 43, 39, 78. He took 12 threes a game and made, 4.6 of them. Averaged 4.4 rebounds, 3.3 assists with a near 2-to-1 assist turnover ratio. Donte became a really good player at the end of last year. And then, oh, by the way,
do the playoffs
into the playoffs, where in the first series, he was just okay, right? He was just fine. But in the second series against Indiana, he averaged 22 in that 7-game series, including the crazy 39-point explosion. We'll talk about Donte a little bit more when we get to Minnesota. But that's what this deal comes down to for me, for the Knicks, is that I don't think that the difference between Randle and Cat is Donte DiVincenzo size, let alone this additional first-round pick. And on top of that, you can say, oh yeah, Tom Thibodeau, he's going to come and help Karl Towns fix the defense, and he's going to get the most out of him on the defensive end. We've seen this game before.
it was much younger. I don't want to turn into a Tibbs defender here or a Knicks homer here. I do think there's something to be said about like a kid on his rookie deal that is learning how to play under Tom Thibodeau to someone that's now going to be 28 this year that has seen the league a little bit and might respect what Tibbs brings to the team and the Knicks are also not to say culture and be like, sound like a Miami Heat fan. Like he's going into an environment where the entire roster seems to have bought in to what they're building there. And I think he'd be more prepared to succeed under Tibbs than he was the first time.
Sam,
go ahead.
I was just to Andrew's point earlier. I think I agree with you if they're both fours. Do you think there's a wider gap, say Donte DiVincenzo gap between Cat and Julius Randle at the 5, considering we feel like Julius was going to have to play the 5 for this team? Is that gap wider if you're only talking about them filling the 5 spot for this specific roster and team?
It's wider, but it's still not DiVincenzo sized to me. So I want to note this before I go into all these numbers about defense here with Cat, right? The last time Karl-Anthony Towns played the center position for the Minnesota Timberwolves was the 2021-22 season. That's the year where he played 74 games, right? So out of the last 5 years, the year where he played the most, Minnesota had the 13th best defense in the league. He, I think, had showcased enough improvement defensively to where it was no longer a catastrophe, right? I thought early in his career, he was basically a catastrophe on defense. By 2022, he had figured some things out defensively to where it was no longer like a total mess, right? Having said that, in that 2021-22 season with Cat on the court, they had a 113.4 defensive rating. With him off the court, they had a 110.7 defensive rating. So I would argue that that team was being driven a little bit more by Jaden McDaniels defensively, by Patrick Beverley defensively. That was a year where Jared Vanderbilt really broke out defensively and was really good. It was also the year where they played D'Angelo Russell, I think, kind of across the back line defensively, and he was kind of able to call out coverages and make things a little bit easier. Having said that, Cat was serviceable defensively at the 5, I think is a fair way to put it. When Cat was coached by Tom Thibodeau, that was his second, third, and fourth years in the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
Minnesota finished 27th, 27th, and 24th in defense.
Is that bad?
That's bad. For Tom Thibodeau teams, that is exceptionally bad. For teams that have Jimmy Butler, one of those teams at least had Jimmy Butler, they finished 27th in defense with Jimmy Butler flying around everywhere, right? In 2016-17 with Karl Towns on the court, they had a 113.6 defensive rating. With him off the court, they had a 107 defensive rating. In 2017-18, the year where they had Jimmy Butler and they kind of tied Jimmy to Cat, when they were on the court together, Towns had a 111.2 defensive rating. When he was on the court, with him off the court, it was 113. So that was a solid year. They still finished 27th in defense. That's not very good, right? With Jimmy and Cat together, they had a +10 net rating. I think you can look at the Jimmy and the Jimmy idea and, kind of pigeonhole this idea of having 2 great defensive wings in OG and McHale, plus the creation in Jalen Brunson, and think that the Knicks can be that good. On offense, I think they're going to be so good that it's not going to matter. The defense, that it still will matter on defense, but the offense is going to be so good that it's going to be ridiculous. In 2018-19, after they had moved Jimmy, they had a 113.7 defensive rating with Towns on the court, 113 with him off the court. In total, during those 3 seasons with Tibbs, 112.8 defensive rating, over 8,500 minutes with Towns on, 3,300 minutes with Towns off, a 111.4 defensive rating. Those numbers courtesy of play-by-play stats. Shout out to Daryl Blackport. The last 2 years combined, obviously they've had Rudy Gobert. I went and pulled the numbers in terms of what they look like when they're on the court together and what Cat looks like when he's on the court without Rudy, because that is ostensibly when he's playing center, right? The team had a 110.4 defensive rating with just Rudy on the court over those 2,900 minutes. With both of them on the court, it was a 111.5 defensive rating. Without Rudy and with Karl-Anthony Towns on the court, it was a 112.8 defensive rating. So that number is okay. It's not catastrophic. That is including 2 seasons. Last year, there was a massive spike in offensive efficiency, right? So, don't look at those numbers combined and say like, oh yeah, they, would have finished the equivalent of 7th defensively or whatever last year, 4th. You can't do that because there was such a massive spike last year that doesn't really work. Last year only, when Rudy was on the court without Karl-Anthony Towns, the Timberwolves had a 105.3 defensive rating. Cat with Rudy was 112.6 defensive rating. Cat without Rudy was 111. 111 is totally okay for last year. Like, that's a good number. You can at least make that work. But obviously there was a massive difference and there was a massive gap in terms of what Minnesota was doing with Karl Towns versus when Rudy was on the court. And that makes me think personally that Rudy and some of the other guys like Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards to an extent, and Mike Conley being able to call out coverages, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker certainly probably played a much bigger role in lifting that defense than Karl-Anthony Towns. And, Russell Thomas can say a lot of noise in single season, wowie stuff. So with or without you, numbers where you look at the on and offs. I mean, guys, I've just pulled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seasons worth of numbers here. And he's only been a positive on defense once in those 6 years in terms of his impact on the team. So that's my concern with all of this, is how do the Knicks defend with Karl Towns at the 5? When Tibbs was there, I went and pulled some clips. We can watch them right now. This is the last game that Minnesota played against Houston in their playoff series that year. A couple good, couple bad clips, nothing crazy. You don't have to be watching on YouTube. We'll explain here. Basically, they played Cat in this insanely deep drop. Just this ridiculously, absurdly deep drop where he was below the foul line. And you can't really do that. The reason I like these clips is because A, super high leverage moment, but B, a lot of teams run offense very similar to this Houston team now, right? That's the big key for me. This Houston team is a lot more similar to NBA offense now than what NBA offense was back in 2018, right? And I think that they'll adjust. I don't think Cat will be sitting at the dotted circle necessarily anymore. Having said that, Andrew, you'll be able to tell me this. Mitch doesn't play that much higher.
No, Mitch plays in a low drop. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a low drop for Mitch for sure. So I'm a little bit, I don't think Cat plays well in drop coverage is my main overarching concern here. I think he's a lot better kind of playing at the level and recovering and kind of trying to run around a little bit and just being engaged a little bit more. I don't think he's a very good weak side rim protector. I don't think that he's great at adjusting in drop. Do you think Tom Thibodeau will be flexible enough to do that? Or do you think that he will basically just say, look, this is my scheme and this is what we do here, having already coached Karl-Anthony Towns?
Again, the word you used in everything you just said, the one that stood out to me was serviceable. I don't think he's going to elevate their defense. I don't think he's going to, whether they're playing drop, whether they're switching more, whether they're bringing him to the level, whether they're putting him at the, wherever he's at the nail, regardless of where you put him, I think teams will try to attack it. They're also going to bring Jalen Brunson into a lot of actions, especially since the Knicks don't play any zone. They're going to take advantage of a lot of pick and roll with both of them. I agree with you. The defense is a concern. My hope is that even when they do have Towns in drop at times, or if you just take advantage of switching, that the defensive personnel around them is better than, now again, you said Jimmy Butler on that team, but like the defensive personnel around them now is some of the most high level defensive personnel that you can put around him. Like you talk about Gobert, like one of a generationally great defensive player, which like where were the Wolves as a team defensively? Now I don't think the Knicks can get to that level defensively.
Yeah.
But if they can get to that 13-14 range and have the best offense in the league potentially, then that's where I think the sweet spot is.
So here, Bryce, I'm going to ask you this question now. What I'm worried about specifically with the Knicks is the Brunson Cat pick and roll, basically. I'm sure that the Knicks and Tibbs will try to hide Brunson in some way. But when you have OG and McHale and, probably Josh Hart and Deuce and those guys, right? You're probably going to switch 1 through 4, I would guess, on a lot of off-ball actions, right? You're not going to have Jalen like fight through all these off-ball actions, right, in the playoffs. How do you go about guarding a Towns Brunson ball screen situation? Do you try to just like sag way off and help? Do you that's where I'm worried about this, is that specific duo concerns me.
Can that duo get aggressive and then you rely on those 3 behind them to just be really, really good? Like that.
Maybe
my first instinct is, you talked about Cat playing higher. I don't know how much the Knicks do this, Andrew, but like my almost instinct is like, let Cat play higher. Let's blitz it and let those 3 guys behind it go crazy and just be really, really good in scramble and rotations.
So this is where I need both of your help, because I'm coming at it from the perspective of what they did with Randle. When they had Randle, there were times when they would blitz it. There would be times where he'd just play the same drop. Randle, watching him defensively at times can be a chore, because there are high energy plays where he's engaged. And then there are him with his hands down, and this is a very, like, there's this game against the Suns last year that stood out to pretty much every Knicks fan, because it was a bit of a turning point. Randle was being taken advantage of in moments throughout the first 10 or 15 games of the season. And on this Sunday night game against the Suns, they made it a mission, like, just bring him into every action. We're not even attacking Jalen Brunson tonight. We're going Devin Booker in every pick and roll, and we're taking advantage of Julius Randle. And it was the first time they actually got exposed because of Randle on the defensive end, whether it be in drop or, whatever coverage they were in, they were taking advantage of him. So I have to now recalibrate and ask you guys, like, where they could put Towns, because I do think Tibbs will adjust to what's best for his personnel. And if he thinks it's Towns in a deep drop, great. If they bring him up higher, great. If it's switching everything, great. I think he'll adjust. But what do you guys think would be the best coverage for him?
Yeah. So the difference between Randle and Towns is that Randle is smaller, but a little bit more mobile, right? Than what Cat is.
Okay.
He just, like, truly he is, like, we can talk about
when
Randle's
engaged,
mobility
yes.
concerns and the engagement, but look, like, during a regular season, there are going to be moments where you get a little bit of that from Cat too, for sure. I think he is generally a bit more engaged than Randle, but I wouldn't say it's like significantly, a different deal. I would say that given that playing like a higher catch drop almost would be my plan, like kind of how, look, I'm going to bring up Anthony Davis, but obviously Cat is nowhere near as good as Anthony Davis. I'm just saying scheme wise, the Lakers do like to play like a bit of a higher drop with AD. And then I would have, as Bryce alluded to, McHale and OG kind of hopefully being able to like run back behind the play a little bit and be able to clean up while Cat recovers back into the play. as a drop defender back onto his big man. Bryce, is that kind of what you're envisioning a little bit? You're unmuted, Bryce.
I'm sorry, I was typing stuff. I think in the playoffs, that's what a game, because here's what I wouldn't want. Here's my biggest fear is you just let a team get into that 2-man combination and attack it. And they get to a mid-range jumper. And then Cat plays a little bit higher, and then Hezzy and goes by. And then he overcommits and the big picks and pops. Let's say it's the Celtics or whatever, whoever it is. And so I would just want to do something where it's, you know what? We're going to get the ball out of this dude's hands and out of Jalen and Cat's primary defenders as quick as possible. And we have these other dudes that are awesome. And so let's make them be the best defenders on the floor. I just don't know how realistic that is in the regular season. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if you can do that possession after possession after possession in a random game in February. Now, if there's a coach to do it, it's probably Tom Thibodeau.
Yeah. And to your point about the playoffs being potentially doing something different, this is where I will say the most engaged I saw Julius in the last 2 years. And as far as like him not being as much of a liability was that Cavs playoff series with the Knicks 1-5, and they were blitzing like over half court. They were, if they would go to the guard screens in Cleveland and go Garland, Mitchell, and Randle's jumping it. And it's like, oh, we're doing this now. Okay. So there is a version of that where they switch up their coverages when it becomes more important, like during the Sixers series with Maxey. Now, nothing worked against Tyrese Maxey. So there was no actual coverage that you can point to and say that the Knicks like succeeded, but they did switch it up to first. It's like, all right, we're going to put OG Anunoby on him and he'll chase him around. Then here's Deuce McBride. He'll chase him around. Then we put Josh Hart on him. And then it just became blitzing him. And if Embiid puts up 40, he puts up 40, but we need to make sure Maxey doesn't get going.
So to close on the Knicks here a little bit, right? I want to move to the Wolves after this because we've, as I said, we wanted to structure the Knicks stuff up top because I think the Knicks stuff is super interesting. And then we're going to move to the Wolves after. Part of that is because we want to clip up these videos and things like that for YouTube, to be honest with you. My biggest overarching concern for the Knicks, to be completely transparent, is not what it does for this year. It's what if this does not work this year? And then you have to figure out what happens, because the Celtics are still better than they are, right? Just point blank. I think this trade actually makes them a little bit more likely to be able to manage the Celtics and be able to deal with the Celtics. I think this makes them if they're at full health, a more interesting matchup for the Celtics now, because they can theoretically just go, okay, we're going to go and try and like outscore you and see what happens, right? We have the wings to be able to guard Jalen and Jason and OG and Mikhail. We have Jalen Brunson, who we think is going to be the elite level guard we need. And we're going to just see what happens with Cat against Kristaps and everything like that. I think this makes them match up better with Boston. I actually think it kind of makes them match up worse with Philly, if I'm being honest. Because I think that what they'll probably try to do is have Cat guard Joel, and that tends not to go super well in the experience that I have, I feel like.
Who do you think they're going to put on Joel? Because my initial thought was this also, that Philly's the team that worries me a little bit more.
I would think they'll have Anunoby.
Yeah, so that's my point. I think they will have Cat guard Joel, and then maybe have Mitch on the court as like a help defender. That's a series, or you try and have Cat guard Joel or OG guard Joel. And I don't think either of those things are, if Joel gets to the playoffs healthy, I don't think either of those things work well.
Did you say OG on Joel, Andrew?
I did, but I said you could have Mitch or Anunoby.
Okay. I guess my thing with that is like, the OG one makes sense if Cat was a better off ball. Like I would like to see him in that role and see how good he could be as like the roamer that then comes over and helps OG and doesn't get lost guarding Caleb Martin or Oubre or Paul George, whoever he's having to guard now.
Yeah, I assume they would have Mitch do that. Like,
so
Mitch
they would
guard
This is where
Martin
they would
into
go
the help
big then.
defender. Yeah,
That's where the
but
two. So sorry, go ahead, Sam.
then you have to deal with Maxey. That's my main concern for that is, okay, we're just going to run Maxey Joel ball screens all the time, and we're going to make Cat guard and ball screens. And that's going to be it.
So
he's not going to be successful against Tyrese. Tyrese is too fast for him.
So what if you have, but if you don't have Cat specifically as the primary defender on Joel, and it's either Anunoby or Mitch, like it's the exact same coverage that they were playing in the playoffs last year.
And you just run, so say he's guarding Caleb Martin, right? You run 1-4 ball screens with Tyrese and Caleb Martin and bring Cat up to the level.
So then you're just saying bringing Cat into every I think you're gonna have this problem with Randle anyway, which is why I think if any concerns I had with Philly were that like it's either Randle, like it's the exact same thing, and I think the Knicks have, at least from a 1-to-1 standpoint, enough, you know.
So yes, I don't disagree with you on that, but here's the issue I was getting at. Let's say this doesn't work, right? They're kind of locked into this roster now.
Yeah, this is the team now. Yeah.
This is the team. They are, we all assume they're going to extend Mikal, right? Like that's kind of where this is going.
Eligible Monday.
They're going to be locked in at like a little over $200 million in 2026-27 for like 7 or 8 guys. The first apron threshold is currently slated at 215. Second apron is currently slated at 228. And those 7 or 8 guys do not include Mitchell Robinson's deal or like any other center or big or whatever, right? So they are financially pretty strapped to this at this point. And part of what I liked about the way the Knicks were building this is that because Jalen chose to give some back, and seemingly because Mikal is probably going to take this extension, potentially going to take this extension until it happens, right? I liked the idea of them continuing to be flexible in the marketplace. I just don't think at the end of the day, this is the move I would have made.
By the way, they're at 200 for 5 guys. Cat, OG, Brunson, Bridges, Hart, and that's if you put Bridges at 40 million in 26-27 for 5 guys.
I think it's a little bit less. I think he'll make a little bit less than 40, but nonetheless, your point is valid, Bryce. So I think that this would not have been my all-in move, I guess is where I'm at on it.
I don't even disagree with you, Sam. I think the initial reaction to the eventual trading of Julius Randle, because we'd always said he would be our DeMar DeRozan one day, that one day this guy that helped build the thing would get traded for the superstar that helps you get over the threshold. And I don't have that definitive confidence in trading Randle like you could have had as a Raptors fan, that you traded out DeMar but got Kawhi Leonard back. I'm clearly less concerned about the defensive issues. I wish I loved Cat more. I just was never a Cat guy.
That's kind of where I'm at.
It would make it so much more confident about this deal and the offensive ceiling being the thing that matters. If I just was always a Cat guy, I never was. So I'm more talking myself into it than
Sam. How would you feel if they would have traded, if it was only the pick?
Randle and the pick for Cat.
Yeah,
I think that it'd make all the sense in the world.
Yeah, you would feel really good now. Like Donte, Donte being the difference between the two guys is the hang up here.
To me, Donte is worth like multiple first-round picks,
especially considering Cat's contract.
Yes,
and how
I think they basically moved 3 firsts. If we're doing it in draft capital terms, I think they basically moved like 3 firsts and then whatever picks they moved to Charlotte to facilitate this thing for Cat on a deal where I think it's frankly like a negative value contract at the end of the day.
So can I just one DiVincenzo note and then we can go over to the Wolves, because I know we've gone a little long here.
Yeah.
because the sample you brought up is the first. It's the last 35 games of the season, which coincide with Randle dislocating his shoulder and OG Anunoby only playing, I believe, the final seven games are left in the regular season because he went out with his elbow injury. So his volume went up significantly, which is like I understand what it was.
Took 17 field goal attempts per game in that time.
And how many of those were threes? Because that's what he became.
12.
It was just he was Klay Thompson for 35 games. Is there a world where the Knicks sold high? I understand how valuable the contract is, but that's my thought is, did they actually sell high on a guy that had a really good 35 games?
It's
unequivocally,
good call.
Yes. I think there's absolutely a chance of that. And that's why, like, when I talk about this deal, I can say that this isn't the deal that I would have done. I think there's a chance this deal looks totally fine for the Knicks.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't say that this is like they are, fucked and they have no chance to make a title run. They do, I think. Yeah. Like I said, this makes them match up better, in my opinion, with Boston than they previously did. So I'm all for that. I just also think that there is significant downside risk here in a way that I would not have continued to explore if I was them.
To your point, if it doesn't work, they're fucked. Whereas if the lineup they had this year with Randle didn't work, you have one more move in you. Yeah, you have an option to go to.
You still have options. Correct.